Stated, let me just introduce the presenters. Sherry Harris Dunning. She oversees 8 counties in central and eastern Oregon, work involving routine compliance inspections of solid waste facilities. Denise Rowcroft, sustainability educator for the Environmental Center. I'm assuming that's here in Bend. All right, we're ready to roll.
Thank you. And my name's Sherry Harris. I'm going to try. Can you let me know if you can hear me okay? Can I shut the door? Yes. And then we'll leave that one? That'd be great. So again, I'm a materials management specialist in DEQ's regional office here in Bend. And Denise, I don't know if you want to say anything else about the work that you do.
I manage the Rethink Waste project for the Environmental Center.
And so what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to share with you a summary of climate impact of materials and some actions that individuals, businesses, and governments can take to reduce those impacts. But before we start, I know that not everybody has come back yet from break, but who here is from government? Just raise your hand if you are from government. Okay, one. What about business? Okay, handful of you, many of you, okay. School, education services, anybody? No. Nonprofit? And just otherwise interested citizen here to learn. Excellent. Good. Quite a diverse group. All right. Let me see if I can do this without speeding ahead. Oh, sorry. I knew I was going to do it. Okay. Materials. Let's start. What are materials? It's the stuff. Packaging, food, cell phones, equipment, paper, chairs, all the durable goods that we buy, that businesses buy, and that we use, and it's all the stuff that ends up either getting recycled or disposed of when we're done with it. So, all materials that we use have a life of sorts, as shown in this diagram. They have a life cycle. They typically start off as raw materials, whether it be trees, or ore, or petroleum. These raw materials are harvested, they're processed, converted into the primary materials such as steel or plastic, and then those primary materials are turned into the goods and the services that we use. So chairs and the clothing and the consumer goods and the electronics. And we use them, and then eventually we tire them. So if these materials are lucky, they might get repaired or reused or recycled. But if not, we've got landfill, and here in Bend they end up at the Not Pit landfill. So again, sometimes the life cycle, the materials are called, it's called the life cycle. And the thing to think about is that greenhouse gas emissions will occur at every stage of the life cycle process, from the extraction of the ore and the materials, to making the initial principal stock, to the material itself, and to the end use. So the question is how much do materials matter, and where do these emissions occur? That's really annoying. Okay, keep doing that. Wrong way. Okay. So how many of you have heard of a greenhouse gas inventory? Several of you have. So a greenhouse gas inventory, it's an accounting exercise that will add up all the emissions from a business or a community or a nation, and it reports out totals and the major contributors. So this pie chart here, you can see how it breaks down. You've got electric power industry at 34%, transportation at 28%, industry 19%, agriculture, commercial, and residential. This is sort of typically what you would see. But what you don't really get a chance to see here is where materials come in. It's not broken out per se to accounting for how we would look at the greenhouse gas emissions of materials. So let's look at another one. Okay. So to better understand the relative importance of materials, EPA took that same graph, the conventional inventory, and just classified it differently, using broad economic systems. And so this chart shows the same emissions that I showed earlier, but organized into different groups. So we have lighting, heating, and cooling contributing to 25%. We have, that's why green building is so important. We have transportation of people at 24%, very small amount for infrastructure, use of appliances and devices at 8%. You can see there on that left side, you've got provisions of goods, provision of food, which makes up the broad category of materials at 42%. So this way, you're beginning to understand the significance of materials. And in fact, materials are so important that when I first came to work for DEQ, the program that I worked for was called the Solid Waste Program. But in 2013, we developed the 2050 vision statement, and we changed our name to be called Materials Management, because we don't want to just look at the end, the solid waste part. We want to look all the way upstream and look at the impact of materials through the entire life cycle. Okay, so here's the same emissions. We're looking now at the 42% that we had on that left side. And you can break it down and you can see when you're looking at materials where the impacts are. And again, it's the same thing. You've got building, lighting at 25%, transportation of people, 24%, infrastructure just 1%. But look how much upstream processes matter. It's almost a third of that entire chart for the greenhouse gas emissions. So the takeaway message of all of this is that the upstream part, the part that we really hadn't been paying much attention to, really, really matters a lot. Keep doing this. Okay, so let's take a moment and talk about recycling, because Oregonians, we're great recyclers. We love to recycle, and we do a really good job at it. And it turns out that recycling is a great way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, in part because certain wastes, like paper, for example, they decompose in landfills and they produce methane. And methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. And so when we keep degradable wastes or organic wastes out of the landfill, it helps to reduce methane emissions. But more importantly, when we recycle, what we're doing is it provides industry with essentially those raw materials that we don't have to extract. So every year, Oregon does an annual survey of recyclers, and we use a survey to estimate state and local recycling rates and energy and greenhouse gas benefits. So you can see that in 2014, we saved 27 trillion BTUs of energy by recycling. That's pretty darn amazing. And we reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 2.9 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And you can look at what those equivalents are in terms of average passenger cars essentially not being taken off the road. So again, what we're doing as far as recycling is great. And I want to take one more closer look at recycling and talk about something which affects us. We live in the center of the state, and so when we take our recycling, it has to go to Portland. Now, as it was mentioned at the beginning, I cover 8 counties. I'm out in Grant County, I'm out in Harney County, I'm out in Malheur County. And so the question came up was, what about the long haul of this material? Is this a factor in terms of when we're looking at carbon emissions and impact? And it turns out that it really is not a limiting factor. Oops, sorry about that. So what we're going to look at is some materials, production savings, and where the break-even point might be when we look at truck, rail, and freighter. Okay, wow, this is super sensitive. Just like jumps around. So here are some break-even points. Aluminum can be shipped more than 500,000 miles in an ocean freighter before you use more energy than it would take for recycling. So that's basically going all the way around the world to Cape Canaveral, up to back to the moon. So, and of course we know with aluminum you're extracting bauxite ore, which is very that's so when you're looking at that embodied energy. But even glass, which we have a difficult time finding markets in recycling, but even glass itself, it has the lowest energy savings per ton, can be put on a rail car and shipped all the way across the US and halfway back again. So the takeaway message here is that the transportation is not as significant. It's not the limiting factor when we're talking about taking our recyclables to market. Okay, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. Okay, let me pyramid, and we talk about that recycling is, yes, it's a very good strategy. We want to recycle whenever we can, but it's not our only option. You might remember the phrase reduce, reuse, and recycle, which is a hierarchy of preferences. So reducing and reusing are even better. So I want to talk about reducing waste first. And I want to talk about a case study that DEQ did some time ago where we looked at the environmental impact of delivery methods of drinking water. So there were 48 different options that were looked at, but in the interest of time, I'm going to just touch on a couple of them. Okay. So what we have here is we have a graph. And what this graph shows is right now we have the blue and the red bar up. And the blue bar shows if you have a one-use plastic water bottle, like say you go to Costco and decide not to use your Hydro Flask or something else, and you go to Costco and get your one-use bottle. And let's say a lot of people do that and we have a recycling rate of 37%. What we're showing there is essentially the CO2 equivalent per 1,000 gallons. Okay. The red one shows the same thing, but recycling it at almost double, 62% recycling. So you can see, obviously, recycling does gain you benefit. So if you do decide to use a one-use plastic bottle, please do recycle it because there is some benefit. But it's not the best way to go. Let's look a little bit more. So there are a lot of companies that what they're doing is they're making these ultra-thin plastic bottles. And you can just feel the difference in them. Okay, they're much, much thinner. So if you decide to use one of those bottles instead, and it was recycled at 62%, you can again begin to see that you're just about at quite a bit, at 800 versus almost 1,000 there in terms of your savings. Okay, let's keep going. Now, let's move away from these one-use bottles because I personally can't stand them, and go with using a reusable container. So in this case, you're going to take a reusable container and you're going to use tap water, but every single day you're going to put it in the washing machine. But your dishwasher, but your dishwasher is the lowest rated Energy Star rating, and every single day you're sticking it in your washing. So under that scenario where you're wasting a lot of water, you're using an awful lot of energy to wash that reusable bottle out, you can still see how much better that is than using the ultra-thin, lightweight plastic bottle. But lastly, if you take your reusable water bottle and you just wash it once a week, and you use the highest rated Energy Star dishwasher, can any of you see that orange bar right there? Barely. So even though this may make complete common sense to all of us here in the room, it's a reminder that such a simple action of using a reusable water bottle and just washing it once a week in a dishwasher has an enormous impact on CO2 emissions. Okay. I think this is you.
Yeah. So I love that example because every time I do presentations and we talk about reusables here in the high desert, that's a factor that comes up. It's like, well, here we are in a dry climate. Does it make sense to use our water to be reusing that thing? And while this isn't looking at it through a lens of water conservation, it is looking at it through a lens of greenhouse gas emissions, which a lot of times we don't think about when we're thinking about reusing or recycling. It's just kind of like, what do I do with this item? If I recycle it, it's good. If it's not recyclable, it must be bad. Even though sometimes it might actually have a smaller environmental impact in terms of a life cycle analysis and a greenhouse gas emissions.
Tell me when you want me to go to the next slide.
Sure. So reusing, obviously is using something over and over again. There's multiple ways that we can do that, and I'll touch on some examples. But I thought this is kind of neat in terms of you know, the energy efficiency of reusing, for instance, a computer is 5 to 20 times more energy you're saving than recycling it. And even a corrugated box, 3 to 4 times more energy than recycling it. So reuse is always a better option first over recycling. I did want to touch on another, we're having a resurgence of repair culture that used to be very strong when goods were made to be repaired and people tinkered with their stuff and stores weren't everywhere. You know, fast forward 50 years, the quality of our goods has really declined, but there's now this resurgence of people who really want to connect with their things and want to learn how to repair it. And there's this guy who said, you don't really own your stuff unless you can repair it, unless you know how to repair it. So there's a whole right to repair movement that's going on. There's an organization called ifixit.org, also ifixit.com. It's the same organization. They kind of have a nonprofit education arm and also a practical open source repair guide arm. I just got an email today that had how to repair all these totally different things, like a kid's scooter, a cool camera, a blender, a breakdown of a new iPhone 7. So there's all sorts of different things that people can go and learn how to repair and share with others. We host repair cafes. We've been doing it since 2013, and we've repaired, I say we, it's actually other volunteers, collectively have repaired over 200 items. And it's a super neat experience because people, you know, number one, are kind of getting to see the inside of their stuff, and sometimes walking away with, wow, the $20 toaster is kind of a bummer because now it's broken because it's planned to break within 6 months. And next time maybe thinking about, is it repairable before they buy it? That contrasted with when we see people walk in with, toasters are a big thing for whatever reason. This one woman had a toaster that was her parents', that they got it for a wedding gift, so back in the 50s, and that was repairable. So this question came up, we're like, well, how do we know if something's repairable or not? And generally, if it's cheap, it's not. And another suggestion that a volunteer had was, well, if it was made before 1950, like go to a thrift store to get quality goods instead of going to a store and getting something new for a quality good. So repair is something that is a great option as opposed to replacing, not only because you're connecting with your stuff, but all those upstream impacts that you're preventing by not replacing it right away. And again, we can't see that stuff, and that's why it's the hardest. All we see is what happens to it now, but you gotta remember all the stuff that happened beforehand. So before I move on, if you need anything that has to be repaired, our next one's gonna be November 15th at DIY Cave. It's a great place to go and repair your own stuff. So you can do the next slide.
Okay.
And then, you know, there's other ways to reuse in terms of giving things away, donating things, buying used, consigning. There's so many different options now. It's awesome. We used to host a swap site back when the Environmental Center and Resource were two separate organizations, like back in 2006, 7, 8. And we had a site where people could exchange their items. And eventually we realized, you know, it's not really being utilized anymore. And primarily it's because Craigslist came about and people could just, hey, I've got all this free stuff, come in and grab it. So it's a very useful way to trade your items. There's also a new app called Nextdoor that I just signed on to that's sort of neighborhood specific, and all sorts of stuff that's popping up on that. It's kind of like a very localized Craigslist, but that's another way to connect with neighbors to sort of get rid of the stuff you don't need, or to get other stuff, or to even create a sharing economy in your own localized neighborhood of, hey, do you have a lawnmower I can borrow? Because everyone in our cul-de-sac doesn't need a lawnmower. You know, there's 4 lawns, 1 lawnmower, you get all 4 lawns. So there's a big resurgence of really trying to connect communities and share our stuff. And I think those tools are great for that. So I love creative reuse. I just think it's super fun and the more inspiring way to think about how to use the materials that are already there in the world. At Bend Design Con, there's going to be a workshop called Does the World Really Need Another Chair? And I don't know who does it or what they're talking about, but I hope that they're going to talk about, yeah, we don't need another chair. And let's look at all the office chairs that are out there in Restore and every thrift store, all those corporate office chairs. Think about how can we redo this in a cool, funky way that I want to have in my house and utilize the materials that are already out there in the world instead of creating new things.
Oh dear. Okay, it's back to me for a bit. So one of the things that I want to talk about that's getting a lot of attention is food. And so we've seen that on the left side, the hierarchy for reduce, reuse, recycle. And EPA has what they call a food recovery hierarchy. And it's quite similar. So we're talking about source production, food, feed hungry people, feed hungry animals, industrial uses for ag, composting, and landfills. So what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the food production chain, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time. Sorry about that. Talking about food. So, just like we were talking about other materials, we've got greenhouse gases being emitted along the whole life cycle of food production, from farm to factory to retail. And many people are assuming that the impacts of transportation are large, and they do exist, but emissions upstream in food production, farms and factories, are at least 10 times higher than emissions from transporting food. And when we refrigerate and cook food, that uses energy. When food is wasted, it goes into the landfill. We have more emissions. So again, at a landfill, many of them will have a way to capture methane. And the not landfill does a good job at that. But when you have any kind of organic waste and it goes there, it produces methane, which is a major greenhouse gas contributor. So an interesting statistic, pound for pound, methane is 25 times more powerful at global warming than carbon dioxide. So basically what we want to talk about is keeping food out of the landfill if possible. And we want to work our way back up that hierarchy to looking at how we can reduce the amount of food that we're wasting in the first place. So let's look at some really staggering statistics. These are really staggering to me. So the total annual cost of wasted food in the US is estimated at $165 billion. Up to 40% of food produced in the US goes uneaten. And on a consumer level, about 25% of all the food that we buy ends up getting wasted. So that's really pretty staggering statistics. And the other part that is really staggering, that kind of goes hand in hand, is this idea of this abundance and wasting food versus food insecurity. So, we have 50 million Americans are food insecure, meaning they don't know where their next meal is coming from. Basically 1 out of 7 adults, 1 out of 6 children. So last year I looked it up. Last year in 2015, 42.2 million Americans lived in food insecure households, and of the 42.2 million, 13.1 were children. So we have this really weird kind of juxtaposition of having all this food that isn't getting eaten, gets wasted, and then we have all these people who don't really have enough food to eat. So I want to just take a little look about how we might manage this problem of wasted food. So we'll look at landfills really quickly. So not all landfills are the same, as I mentioned. But the US EPA estimates that basically the average US landfill emits 0.5 pound of CO2 equivalent for every 1 pound of food waste that goes into the landfill. Again, that statistic may very well be different here at Knott because they do capture a lot of the methane. But nonetheless, that's a really staggering statistic. Just knowing that when you landfill food waste, it's contributing to greenhouse gases. So now we're going to compare it to composting. And here in Bend, businesses such as schools, restaurants, supermarkets can compost all their food scraps through a commercial composting program. And residents can opt in for a yard-to-reach service, and they can include vegetable and fruit scraps. And all that composting, you can see how it dramatically reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So I urge all of you, if you live in Bend, your business or your residents, to sign up for the program, because you could see quite how much you're impacting reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So next up, if you have food that's still edible and someone else could eat it, If you donate it, it's even better. This may not necessarily be an option for households, but there's a lot of grocery stores and restaurants that have edible food that they can't sell at the end of the day. So here's some local statistics. Neighborhood Impact Food Recovery Program recovers food from 18 grocery stores in Deschutes County, and they also recover food from local food distributors such as Aloha Produce and High Desert Produce and some farms and wholesale companies. So last year, they recovered 1,300,000 pounds of food, kept it out of the landfill and got it to food insecure people. That's really, really amazing. Also during farmers market season, High Desert Food and Farm Alliance sets up a booth at most local markets, and they accept donations there from local farms and personal gardens, and they then pass that on to Neighborhood Impact Food Bank as well. Okay. So again, donating is even better than composting. Okay. However, there's one that dwarfs all the rest, and that's preventing the wasting of food in the first place. The reason that prevention of wasting food is so powerful is that avoids the greenhouse gas emissions across the full life cycle of the food, from the growing to the farming, all the way through manufacture, transport, and retail. Okay. So, in 1 month, this is how much an average family of 4 wastes when it comes to food. And you might not be able to read the little print, so I'll read some of it for you. Fluid milk, 22 pounds. Other food, including eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, dry beans, peas, lentils, almost 13 pounds. Sweeteners, 15 pounds. Fats and oils, 8.6 pounds. Meat and fish, looks like, I'm trying to see what it says on mine, 10.4 pounds. Okay. So, this brings us to the issue of why household food waste matters so much. In 1 month, the average family of 4 wastes nearly 1/4, 25% of all food purchased. And we don't even realize that we're wasting this food. So not only is wasting food a waste of money, it's a waste of resources and nutrients. So whether you're a business owner, a restaurant owner, a chef, manager a commercial kitchen, we're all consumers of food. We all have to shop and prepare food, and we're all eaters. So this pertains to every single one of us in the room. A leading group of business, foundation, nonprofit, and government leaders committed to reducing food waste recently released a report that estimated that 43% of all food wasted comes from households. That's really huge. Like this photo, the bulk of what was not eaten was perishable. So, the million-dollar question is, why do we waste so much food? Why? And this is something that lots of folks are asking. What behaviors do we have within us that we do this? Well, simple. Sometimes we just go shopping and we buy too much. Things are on sale. Buy one get one free. We forget what we have in the refrigerator. We stick it in the bag and then it goes bad. Okay, we forget to eat it. It's past the date that's printed on the product for the grocery store purposes. There's a whole big issue of labeling of food and what that even means. There's maybe, cooking accidents. You put something together and it burns. And maybe you just don't like it. You go to a restaurant, and as you go to a restaurant, you get huge portions and you just can't eat it. Sometimes we buy food for a particular recipe and then we don't use it again. So what can we do about this? Denise is going to offer up some things we can do.
Great. Can you actually go to the next one?
Yes, I can. I can try.
So before we start, the statistic that I've come across a few times is that if food waste or wasted food were a country, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it would be the 3rd largest country after the United States and China. So to see this in the context of what does this have to do with the climate, it's actually a pretty big deal. And we can also look at this, like that picture of all that food, and say, well, that's not my house. Because it's true, half, right, that was like 40-something% households, so 60% is also happening out at the farms, at the supermarkets, at restaurants. You go into any elementary school and you're like, oh my God, look at all the waste afterwards. However, a lot of times we don't have control over those big things, but we do have control over what we bring into our own house. And so I think the first thing that anyone should do, and this applies to kind of any kind of waste, is just looking at it. What are you throwing out each week? And so if anyone's curious to do this or to actually walk through the process, Eat Smart Waste Less is a website that has some of these toolkits for your own home. And I'll show you some examples of things that you can download pretty easily. But one suggestion is either weighing it or even just putting it on a plate and taking a picture. So you just kind of have this visual like, oh, that much. I'm getting like a bounty of the CSA stuff that I'm trying to keep up with. Like I've got plums from the alley and like all the celery. And so I'm kind of in this food preparation mode. And just last week it was like the celery, 3 bunches of celery just all went super limp. So sort of chop it up and just throw it in the freezer and use it for later. So anyway, looking at what it is that you're wasting, if anything, and then you know kind of what to put your direction towards. So if we go back to the thing. So just some quick tips from this website, other than weighing it, is just storing it properly, using the drawers below, using plastic bags with wet paper towels, keeping things in a jar. There's a whole list. There's this PDF you can download that has like every specific fruit and vegetable and what's the best way to do that. And there were some surprising things on there that I hadn't thought about, so maybe I can check that out. So just skip forward too. And then after that, also keeping track of the things in your fridge that are either going bad, whether they be leftovers or something that you got last week and you know it's kind of on the way out. For me, anytime I buy a jar of tomato sauce, we use half of it, and it always seems that the other half always goes bad. So I try to look for the small jars, which maybe is more packaging, but I know that I'm not going to waste it, and I really like those little jars. So one of these things that you can download, it just says, eat this first, and you can get a little bucket and put this in your fridge, and then it really calls attention to it, and you just pull it out, and you're like, all right, what are we going to have tonight? What are we going to have for lunch tomorrow? And just put it in there. And then the last thing that they suggested, which I'm really trying to get into as a busy working mom, like, oh, I need to do meal planning. So it really does help in terms of not just making your life easier, but for preventing waste. Because now I know if I'm buying spaghetti sauce for mini pizzas on Monday, I'm actually going to utilize it on Wednesday, knowing that I will have some left over. So I do have some examples, some printouts here if anybody wants them.
And the last
at the end.
one more there.
And then also just prepping it. There's this woman who suggests, she wrote this cookbook that my girlfriends rave over, that like you get all your stuff on Sunday and you just roast and cook and prep everything on Sunday and it's ready to go. And then throughout the week you have all these pre-cooked vegetables that you just utilize. So being smart about not only what you buy, but then how you use it throughout the week.
And I know we're probably running kind of short on time, but I want to take just a few more minutes because there's also business opportunities as well. So EPA has a great toolkit out there. There's one for residents, food too good to waste. There's another one where, again, tools for businesses, restaurants to measure their waste. DEQ sponsored a grant for Intel. I want to just take a moment and show you what they did. We have a case study on our website. They ended up doing this full analysis, and it was remarkable. They ended up saving something like, let me see if I have the statistics here. It was pre-consumer food waste by 47%, reduced food cost waste by 13%. And then the Food Waste Alliance is another toolkit. So with respect to the Intel, they ended up with, I don't know, I think it was well over a dozen strategies. And we went through and we just looked at a bunch of them and said, some of these are really cool. So one of them was, they're trimming their vegetables and they had all this left over, like the carrot tops and the celery, whatnot, whatever. And they just ended up using that in creating stock for soup and sauce. My favorite is the fruit, though. Taking the unused fruit and they chopped it up and they made it into chutney. That was great. They took leftover chili and they used it for topping on certain entrees. And then with the salad bar, they ended up reducing the vessel size because once they put it out there, if it wasn't eaten, then they couldn't use it again. So by moving to smaller display sizes, they could still offer the same variety, but not have as much leftovers. And then the one thing, we talked about schools, and the only thing I want to say about schools is that Oregon's done some preliminary research. There's a lot of food waste in school cafeterias. So there were two things that came up. One was when you offer kids food choices, instead of basically saying you have to eat this and you give them the choices, they make better healthy choices and you reduce less waste. And the other is, and this is going along in a lot of schools in Oregon, is where they switched and they had recess before lunch instead of after. So they didn't hurry through the lunch and then they were hungry and they came back in and they ate better. I think we want to add anything more to that at all?
Just that trayless options make a big deal, and I found out that all the schools in Bend are trayless, they go without trays, because the kids tend to sort of overload those. And the other was having a sharing table where, you know, they take their milk, they take their food, they're required to take one of everything, and there's some policy things around that, but then they are able to put it back on the table so that someone else can get it. So there's some improvements.
Back to the materials page. The last thing that is, there's a climate-friendly purchasing toolkit out there in the preliminary stages. Just want to mention it, that's out there for a lot of services that are out there. We're working on one for concrete as well. So go to this website, you can get some information, and I think we'll stop there, and that way we can take a couple questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, because we're running right up on our time here, right?
Quickie, has anybody looked at the size of the new refrigerators? When I do green home tours, I go, what?
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
a two-couple has,
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's sort of like the size of everything, right? The size of your house
yeah.
has really a bigger greenhouse gas impact, because then you have to heat it and fill it with all the stuff. So I think the same goes with
Sure.
the fridge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things that occurred to me during your presentation, Sherry, and one is putting sort of the very best way to prevent greenhouse gases is prevent food waste. But if we were all to do that, then that whole donation section would go away. So you have this kind of weird dynamic that socially we
It is interesting because it is a conundrum, but it's actually, and I think it's actually not true, because I'm on the strategic planning for DEQ when we're actually looking at developing policy for preventing the waste of food. And what we have an issue is a lot of the stuff that goes to neighborhood impact, it ends up at grocery stores because they're not selling it. So there's a lot of places along the way where that food, you know, it's ending up in the landfill, in the compost bin. And at this point, if individuals, like the stuff that I waste isn't going to neighborhood impact. It's the stuff that's in my fridge, and that's what is it? That was like, you know, 40-some-odd% right there. So I hear that, but I think that there's still going to be plenty of food for donation.
well, yeah, but my point was more that there's something sort of crazy about our food system in general, and
Right.
that perhaps part of the reason there's all of this waste is that food is really cheap,
Yes.
but that does not represent the full costs of raising
Exactly.
and transporting that food.
Like everything else, in terms of all the embodied energy that goes into every single thing that we come on.
So it seems to me that would be the area to try to work on, is getting food priced what it really should be.
Yeah, that's a whole other separate argument with like subsidizing and all. Yes, absolutely.
Well-
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
A lot of the food that goes to neighborhood impact for distribution is also wasted. I know personally from having worked in industry. By the time it gets to the places to distribute to those who need it, a lot of it's spoiled, it's not even good.
Yes.
We get tons of baked
Yes.
goods and pastries and
Yes.
other things, not so much fresh fruit and vegetables and other things that people are really looking for.
Exactly. No, that's absolutely right. And I know there's a whole push on trying to make sure that they're getting the food that they need, the more nutritious food. There's a whole big push on that, and also getting refrigerated trucks
A
and
lot
all
of
the
it is
rest of
thrown
that
away.
stuff. Yeah.
The Grow and Give program through
Yes.
High Desert Food
Absolutely.
and Farm Alliance, they were at every
Yeah.
farmer's market.
Yeah.
They've donated about 4,500 pounds, which is
Yeah.
very small compared to
You're
all the
right.
other
There's
baked
leakage
goods.
at every step. There's yeah, absolutely.
But it's appalling how much is actually spoiled.
Yeah.
Any advice for Tetra Paks?
And Tetra Paks are the soy milk, all those things.
All those boxes for that, and you got, and they're not accepted for recycling.
They're not recycled locally. Someone passed along to me a website from the Carton Council, it's an organization from all the companies that sell their products in that. And they actually, I learned this at another conference, that they are working with mills to give them grants to upgrade their equipment so that they can handle those mixed materials to be able to recycle them. But they're not in our area yet. And you can, if you really were like passionate about getting those recycled, you could
Yeah.
mail them. You can find it out at Carton.
I think we're out of time here.
But yeah.
Thank you for the presentation.